Okay, now make a wish and blow out all the candles. Yay! You really made a wish, yeah.
Welcome to the exciting world of existing light photography. As we've just dramatized with our scene from Candace's birthday party, natural lighting, beautiful color, and exciting subjects are the rewards of taking pictures with existing light. What is existing light? Well, it's a photographic term that really means the light we live by. See, existing light comes from many sources. The sun, a light bulb, the huge lamps in a sports arena, the floods on a stage, a candle or campfire, even a lightning bolt. During the next 20 minutes or so, we are going to learn some of the fundamentals of existing light photography. We'll learn what kinds of cameras and film give the best results, and we'll learn some simple techniques that will allow us to take better pictures in a wide variety of existing light situations. Remember, existing light is the light we live by. That means existing light photography is as rich and full of opportunity as life itself. And in many cases, all we need to capture these moments is a 35mm camera, a fast lens, and some fast film. So let's get on with the program. But a quick word about how to use this tape. First of all, think of the tape as a tool. And like any good tool, the more you use it, the more help it'll be to you. Now, I'd suggest playing it through a few times and even taking a few notes to familiarize yourself with the basic images and ideas. Then, if there's something that especially interests you, like indoor sports photography, for instance, go directly to that section and study it by stopping the tape, replaying it, and comparing some of your own photographs or ideas to the ones we've used as illustrations. And then by all means, go out and practice what you've learned. Then watch the tape again. Before long, you'll notice that your photographic horizons are expanding. You'll be taking pictures of things you didn't think could be photographed. You'll learn to work with different kinds of light. And more important, you'll learn to make that light work for you. Now, let's have a closer look at the exciting world of existing light photography. Make a wish. Since existing light is the light we live by, it makes sense that a key word in existing light photography is natural. Photographers working only with a handheld camera and the light available to them can observe without interfering with what their subjects are doing. The subjects may not even realize their picture is being taken. They'll be relaxed, and their expressions will be completely natural. Did you know that it's easy to take excellent candlelight pictures with a 35mm camera, a fast lens, and fast film? Such pictures add variety to the cherished moments you can capture in and around your home using existing light photography. When you take pictures by existing light, you can be discreet and record important events without disturbing the proceedings. Nighttime sporting events are also ideal existing light subjects because they're just too far away to use a flash. A flash, by the way, can be helpful in supplementing existing light. The floodlit Washington Monument is bathed in existing light, but the cherry blossoms in the foreground were close enough to be illuminated with a flash. They give the picture compositional strength by attractively framing the monument in the distance. The fact of the matter is, you can photograph just about anything you see, and some things you can't see, by using fast film and a 35mm camera. Here's a picture that can only be taken with existing light photography. It's the State Fair, the 4th of July, or any event that's celebrated with fireworks. I'll be showing you how to take fireworks and other existing light pictures later on. But let me take just a second to talk about the term fast. You'll hear experienced photographers use it quite a bit in reference to shutter speeds, lenses, and films. Basically, fast means the ability to take pictures with very little light. A fast shutter speed, for example, say 1/250th of a second or higher, stops the action and doesn't let much light into the camera. A fast lens, on the other hand, f2.0 or f1.4, works well in low light situations because it allows more light into the camera through a large diameter maximum lens opening. Fast films, with speed ratings of 400 or higher, are very sensitive to light. So if you're taking pictures in low light, use fast films and fast lenses, especially if you'd like to use fast shutter speeds. You'll get the best picture quality if you select the type of film that matches the type of photograph you'd prefer. There are specific fast films for color prints, color slides, and black and white prints. Let's talk first about color slide film and filters. Filters aren't strictly necessary with film for color prints because you can have it color corrected by your photo finisher. On the other hand, if you're really particular, you can use filters for this film as well. And in that case, you'll be interested in what's coming up. If you expect to take color slides in an area lit by regular household light bulbs, you'll probably want to use a high-speed tungsten slide film, as we used for our subject, illuminated by a table lamp. Tungsten, by the way, simply refers to the kind of light that normally comes from a light bulb. Standard bulbs use tungsten filaments to provide their illumination. If you plan to take a lot of pictures of subjects illuminated by tungsten light, you should use tungsten color slide film because it's designed for that type of light. If you use daylight film, you'll probably want to use a filter over the lens to get the most accurate color. You'll also use a slower shutter speed or larger lens opening to compensate for the light absorbed by the filter. Now let's say you've been taking pictures mostly indoors by tungsten light, and you've got a roll of tungsten-type film in your camera. But suddenly, some exciting daylight possibilities present themselves. Oh, and you've still got 6 exposures left on your roll. What do? Take this 85B amber filter and put it over your lens. The overall color will appear natural. And if your camera's light meter reads directly through the filter over the lens, it'll correct the exposure setting automatically. In this case, nearly 1 stop. On the other hand, if you're like most color slide photographers, you take most of your pictures using daylight type color slide film. But if you want to shoot indoors by tungsten light and still keep daylight film in your camera, well, a filter can help here too. It's called an 80C blue filter, and here's how it works. Pictures taken by tungsten light on daylight film without any filters will appear yellow, as shown on the left. If you were to cover up the other 2 pictures, the unfiltered one probably wouldn't look too bad. But study the center picture. You'll notice how much more accurate the color is when you use the 80C filter, which corrects some of the yellow. On the right, we used an 80A filter and corrected more of the yellow. Both of these filters will require additional exposure. The 80C 1 stop more, from f8 to f5.6, for example. The 80A 2 stops more, from f11 to f5.6. As I mentioned before, if your camera meter reads through the filter, which is likely, it will sense the exposure correction. There's a certain amount of personal taste involved in deciding what, if any, filter you should use. Many photographers rarely use any filters, simply because they like the warmth of pictures taken in tungsten light on daylight color slide film. Sometimes you may want to take pictures in fluorescent light, and if you're using daylight color slide film, your slides may look greenish like the one on the left. It's easy to improve the color of your fluorescent light slides by using a reddish filter over the camera lens, as we did on the right. Notice the difference? You may remember that all of these correction filters will require an increase in exposure. But if you're using color slide film and want to use shutter speeds that allow you to hand-hold your camera and use the filters, you may find it helpful to double your film speed by push processing your film. Push processing also comes in handy when you want to take pictures in very dim light or use fast shutter speeds to stop the action. We took this picture on Kodak Ektachrome tungsten film and then had it push-processed at twice its normal speed. You can have Kodak push-process your Ektachrome films for 2 times their normal speed simply by purchasing the special processing materials available from your photo dealer. For example, push-processing will change the speed of Kodak Ektachrome 400 film from a speed of 400 to a speed of 800. As you may know, you can also process Kodak Ektachrome films at home simply by using a processing kit. The kit includes easy-to-follow instructions for both normal and push processing. This existing light photograph was taken with Kodak Ektachrome P800 1600 professional film. It's designed to give you good slides with push processing to film speeds of 800, 1600, or even 3200. We exposed this shot for 1600. In cases where different film speeds are possible, be sure to indicate the speed at which you expose the film so that it can be processed correctly. So far, we've been talking mostly about slide film, but you can use these same filters on film for color prints as well, but only if you're really particular about the color of your prints. If you use Kodacolor VR films, for instance, you can get good color on your prints without using any camera filters. This is because many of these color adjustments can be made by your photo finisher. You can also double the speed of your black and white film when you do your own processing. Simply increase the development time by 50%. Now let's recap for a moment. We've seen that existing light is the light we live by, and that often it's dim light, requiring fast films and 35mm cameras with fast lenses. We've looked at several different ways to adjust color in our slides by using filters and different kinds of film. And we've seen that it's relatively easy to adjust color in our prints by having them corrected at the photo finishing stage. Although, if we choose, we can use filters for prints as well. And we're now aware of a technique called push processing that allows us to double the speed of our color slide film. Now it's time to look at some camera handling techniques. We've seen that many existing light situations require a camera exposure that combines a large lens opening with a relatively slow shutter speed, 1/30th of a second at f2, for instance. The following reminders and practical hints will help you control the sharpness of your pictures under these conditions. For example, the range of sharpness or depth of field is very shallow with large lens openings. So you'll want to focus your lens very carefully on the most important part of the subject in your photograph. The subjects in front or in back of the main subject will be blurry or out of focus, an effect that can be very pleasing to the eye. But be sure to remember to focus carefully when using wide lens openings. You'll also get sharper existing light pictures if you can press the shutter at a moment when the subject is relatively motionless. As you can see on the left, Kevin was walking, and his motion formed a blurry image. On the right, he had stopped to emphasize a point, and the image is sharp. The photographer was watching for that moment and pressed the shutter at exactly the right time. Watching for the right moment of stillness isn't all you need to get a good existing light photograph. You also need to hold the camera very steady, especially at the moment when you squeeze the shutter. The picture on the left is fuzzy because the photographer moved the camera slightly as the shutter clicked. The picture on the right is sharper because the camera wasn't moved during the exposure. A word to the wise, hold that camera steady. Here are a few techniques that'll help you keep your camera steady. For one thing, brace yourself. That's right, brace your back or prop your elbows up against something solid. Then gently squeeze the shutter release. You'll get much sharper pictures if you remember to do this whenever possible. Of course, a tripod offers the best stability, and you should use one whenever it's practical. But often you'll need to be your own tripod, and that's when bracing comes in handy. Another way of steadying your camera is by resting it on any available solid surface. If the surface is uneven, use a beanbag between it and your camera. Just nestle your camera into the beanbag until it's level and stable, and you're ready to take a sharp picture. So far, we've seen how to use different films and filters to help control color in existing light pictures, and we've learned about the importance of keeping the camera steady, especially in low light situations. Of course, it's hard to beat a tripod for real control in low light situations, and for time exposures like this, the tripod is absolutely essential. Now, let's have a closer look at taking existing light pictures that are not only sharp, but correctly exposed as well. First, be sure to adjust your meter for the film speed you've selected. Your meter will probably indicate an exposure combination of slow shutter speeds, such as 1/30th of a second, and large lens openings, such as f2, for the kinds of dimly lit subjects you'll often run across in existing light photography. Of course, you'll use your camera's light meter frequently, but you may also want to refer to the exposure suggestions in the instructions that are printed on your box of film. Read these through. They contain a lot of useful information. Before we get into existing light techniques, you may want to answer this question. Do you have a preference for light or dark photographs? Some people enjoy the lighter pictures because they can see more detail in the shadows. Others prefer the realism of darkness. And many of us seem to have a wide tolerance for either light or dark existing light pictures. This means that we have some latitude in setting our existing light exposures and don't have to be too particular. Most modern 35mm cameras have built-in exposure meters that display the exposure information right in the camera viewfinder. Your camera will probably warn you when the settings will cause an incorrect exposure. Of course, there are many camera designs, but this warning signal is often located on an edge of the viewfinder. It may be a red light, perhaps blinking, or a needle that enters a red zone at either end of a scale of numbers. Whatever the signal looks like, it's telling you to readjust the exposure settings or use flash to get a good picture. In this viewfinder, we've indicated the overexposure signal with a plus, the underexposure with a minus, and the correct exposure with an N for normal. Remember, different cameras may communicate this information in different ways, but the message is the same. In most cases, you'll want to come as close to the normal exposure as possible to get good existing light photographs. Here's a normal subject that has an average amount of light and dark areas. If your subjects are unevenly lit or have large light and dark areas, you'll need to add your own judgment to the readings you're getting on your camera's light meter. For instance, spotlighted subjects with large dark backgrounds tend to fool the meter. The dark background leads the meter to believe the subject is darker than it really is, and so the well-lit main subject is overexposed. If you have the opportunity to photograph a rehearsal, you may be able to go right on stage to take close-up meter readings of your subject. You can use the same exposure settings later from your seat in the audience. If you can't get close to your subject, use your telephoto lens to take a close-up meter reading. Then use the same settings on your normal lens for the actual picture. Let's say you can't go on stage and you don't have a telephoto lens. The first step is to simply recognize the subject with dark backgrounds and use less exposure than your camera will indicate. So adjust your exposure controls toward the underexposure signal. In this case, it's a minus mark. You may want to compare this exposure with the recommendations found in the film instructions and photo books. If you pose your subject directly in front of a very bright background, such as a window, your camera meter can be misled once again. This time, the subject will be underexposed because the bright window light will make the meter believe there's more light on the subject than there really is. You can correct this exposure error, as we've done here, by moving in close and taking a reading of just your subject's face. Then step back and take the picture. Your meter will read on the overexposed or plus side when a bright background is included in your picture. One way to use window light effectively is to position your subject or camera so that the light falls on the front or side of your subject's face. Open all the window drapes so that you have as much light to work with as possible. You can also use a skylight filter or an 81A filter to add a little extra warmth to your window light portraits. You may also want to use a reflector to put some extra light into the shadows of your subject's face. Position your reflector on the shadow side of your subject and aim it toward the window at an angle that reflects some light into the shadow area. Here's a before and after comparison using a reflector on the side of the subject's face. Window light portraits are simple to do, and the results are pleasing and natural. I don't know about you, but I'm a sports nut. I love to go to live sporting events, and I always take my camera. You can add a natural flavor to pictures of sporting events by using existing light. Of course, it helps if the events are brightly illuminated. You'll get sharper sports pictures if you use the fastest possible shutter speeds and press the shutter release at the exact moment of peak action. Now, these two black and white pictures were both taken on Kodak Tri-X pan film at 1/125th of a second. The slightly blurred picture on the left was taken as the players were starting their jump, and the sharper picture on the right was taken at that split second when the action was momentarily suspended at the peak of their jump. There isn't much time to focus at sports events, and when using wide lens openings, the area of sharp focus is quite shallow. This means that you'll often need to estimate where the action will take place and preset the subject distance on your camera. The player on the far right is out of focus because he wasn't in the preset focus zone. Here's a way to get sharp action pictures even with relatively low shutter speeds. The technique is called panning, and you simply follow the motion of your subject with your camera. Panning works best with a subject moving at a steady speed, such as this ice skater. Good panning means moving your camera smoothly to keep the subject in your viewfinder as you squeeze the shutter release, and continue to move your camera as a follow-through after you've taken the picture. Now, if you want your sports subjects to be bigger in your pictures, but you can't move in close, use your telephoto or long zoom lens. Since these lenses usually have a maximum lens opening of only f4, remember to use fast film and the push processing procedures we talked about earlier, so you can get existing light sports pictures that really stop the action. And you may remember that we call this technique panning. Well, it's okay to call it anything you like, but please remember the technique. It's the backbone of good action photography, especially in existing light. Remember, nice and steady. You know, too many cameras go to bed early, and like the folks who leave the party too soon, they miss an awful lot of the fun. Just look at this beautiful picture. The ideal time to take existing light pictures like this one is during that brief, magical period just after sunset, when color still lingers in the sky. This is that very special moment for really great night pictures with your 35mm camera. It's not difficult to take pictures like this at twilight, when artificial light contrasts beautifully with the gathering dusk. At twilight, the sky colors your scene with a rich royal blue, and the village lights sparkle like gems on blue velvet. This scene, by the way, was taken on daylight film. You can create beautiful abstractions of color and design in the evening hours by moving in close to photograph something as seemingly simple and mundane as the reflections on a wet street. Reflections are darker than the original subject, so you'll need to give pictures more exposure. If you're using slide film and you're really not sure about which is the correct exposure setting, you may want to play it safe and take 3 different exposures. Now, this is called bracketing. You take one exposure at the normal or recommended setting, the one you think is right. Then you take a second exposure at 1 f-stop higher and a third at 1 f-stop lower. Your initial exposure, the one in the middle, is bracketed on either side by additional exposures to simply improve your chances of getting exactly the picture you want. It's best, by the way, to bracket only when there's enough light on your subject to give you a choice of exposure settings. Bracketing isn't necessary when you're using film for color or black and white prints. When determining the exposure is difficult, you may want to lean in the direction of overexposing film for prints because of its exposure latitude. In these situations, some photographers give themselves extra exposure insurance by setting their camera meters for 1/2 of the speed rating for print films. Now please remember to use this overexposing technique for films for prints only, not for color slide films. But whether you're using print or slide film, there comes a time when the subjects you wish to photograph are so shrouded in darkness that it's necessary to take time exposures of 2 or more seconds and use a tripod. Set your camera shutter at B and make sure the tripod is standing on firm ground. Use a cable release so you don't jar the camera and blur the picture. Then simply press the cable release to open the shutter for your time exposure. Release the shutter when the time is up and presto, you're taking pictures in the dark. By the way, remember to bring a flashlight. It's a big help when you want to check your settings. You can use time exposures to make unusual interpretations of something as simple as moving traffic on a busy highway. The oncoming traffic will be recorded as white or yellow streaks of light, and the tail lights will be red streaks. For a shot like this, bracket several exposures around 1 minute at f/16 on 400 speed film. Here's the time exposure technique applied to the heavens. Those circles of light are called a star trace. Each streak is a trace of light caused by the Earth's rotation over an exposure period of several hours. Here's how you take a picture like this. Choose a clear, moonless night and a very dark location. Mount your camera on a tripod and point it at the North Star. Set the shutter on B, set the distance on infinity. For a picture similar to this one, your exposure would be about 4 hours at f/11 using 400 speed film. And speaking of the heavens, lightning pictures can be tricky to take, but the results can be very rewarding. First, make sure you and your camera are sheltered from the elements. Once you're settled, take your camera, mount it on a tripod, and point it in the direction where the lightning has been striking. Your exposure will vary depending on the brightness of the scene and the distance and frequency of the lightning. If you're using 400 speed film, try an exposure of several lightning bolts at about f/11. Now, fireworks are easier than lightning to photograph because you'll have better weather, better control, and more opportunities to work with. Aim the camera in the direction of the fireworks and open the shutter for several bursts at f/16 with 400 speed film. And here's a hint. Save plenty of film for the finale. It can get pretty spectacular. This campfire group was photographed using a time exposure. We did ask the people to hold still for a few seconds while the shutter was open. It helped keep the picture sharp. For something like this, try an exposure of 1/8 of a second at f2 using 400 speed film. Well, that pretty much covers our program. But like Candace's birthday party, the fun is really just about to begin. Existing light photography can be enormously rewarding. All you have to do is remember these basics. Use a 35mm camera and fast film. In dim lighting situations, slow shutter speeds and a large lens opening will help you get the picture you want. If you're working with tungsten or daylight slide film, filters will help you control the color of your pictures. And hold that camera steady. Brace yourself. And remember to focus sharply on the center of attention. If you're working in really dark situations, use a tripod and time exposures. Practice existing light photographic techniques like panning and bracketing. You see, bracketing is especially helpful in getting just the exposure you want. Now all you have to do is go out and take pictures. Then come back and look at the tape again. Before long, you'll begin to discover the wonders of existing light photography. Now, I'd like to leave you with a little exercise. I'm going to display a dozen pictures, and I'd like you to look at each one and try to determine which existing light techniques may have been used. It's a good way of remembering some of the things we've just learned. Oh, and by the way, don't hesitate to stop your tape player if you'd like to study a particular photograph more closely.
Now you can learn to take better pictures with these video cassettes from Kodak. For the serious amateur, step-by-step approaches to composition, lighting, lenses, filters, and film principles. For more advanced photographers, on-location tips from Kodak professionals. And for everyone, the best of Kodak's photo travel films. Over 20 programs available to you now from Kodak, the people who wrote the book on photography.